And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
Before we get to the main event, a couple of notes from last week. We gave you the summer reading list, and for those of you that don't read, and as you can see, I believe everybody should read, but for those of you that aren't reading, try this. Take a look at YouTube and check out Josh Hawley, John Kennedy, or even Ted Cruz cross-examining some of these Biden appointees, particularly for the federal courts. A, it'll be amusing, and B, you will get an opportunity to see just how really awful the Biden nominees for the federal courts are, and how really good John Kennedy and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are, especially John Kennedy. It is a extravaganza of entertainment in addition to good public policy viewing. Last week we paid respect to the immortal Willie Mays, and I came across a couple of great quotes. You know I'm big on looking for quotes for our daily briefing, and the two are these. Reggie Jackson, Mr. October, said, "If the Giants were down 5 runs, he was always convinced that Willie Mays would come to the plate and hit a 5-run homer." And Leo DeRocher, Leo the Lip, the great manager, once said that if he had a guy come up who could hit 400, drive in 150 RBIs, steal 100 bases, he'd still say Willie Mays was better. And just 3 other quick sports notes. The Florida Panthers take their first Stanley Cup, former Flyers goalie there with them. You know, I'm one of those guys that thinks that if you can't make real ice, you probably shouldn't be holding Lord Stanley's Cup, but that's a story for another day. Bring back the Broad Street Bullies, the Montreal Canadiens, and those great Toronto Maple Leafs teams, and we'd all be better off. But also in hockey, my Hershey Bears from right here in central Pennsylvania win their 2nd consecutive Calder Cup and their 13th overall. A true dynasty, not quite the Boston Celtics, but moving in on them. And I just came up with an aside. How about that coach for the Boston Celtics? If you want to see somebody who really should be emulated in every way, a great Christian man first, a fabulous basketball coach third, and in between, just a great human being and leader of young men. And finally, the Philadelphia Phillies, always like to talk about something Pennsylvania, turned a triple play this past week. One of the more rare occasions in sports, but the first time in nearly a century that it was a 1-3-5 triple play. So there's your quick moment of non-political news. And now we move to the main event of the week, which of course was the great debate. The first of its kind held this early in a presidential contest, and the first ever between 2 presidents, or a former president and a sitting president. So there was a lot riding on this debate, and a lot of folks thought that it was Joe Biden's opportunity to show the world that he really wasn't all that feeble, that he was up to the job, that he was physically and mentally prepared, and of course it was a shambles. If this had been a prize fight, it would have been called as a TKO early in the match. I mean, 10 minutes in and Joe Biden can't even put a sentence together, has that halting, terrible moment of his. And his supporters say, well, he got better after. He didn't. His closing statement was fumbled. The one thing that you knew he had had a chance to prepare for. I mean, my gosh, he had 16 people surrounding him for an entire week getting ready for this debate. In my judgment, probably an issue in and of itself, because I think they crammed his head full of too much. But he didn't even have his closing statement down pat. And the folks that negotiated the terms of that debate for President Biden should all be fired for political malpractice. I mean, the whole idea that they would allow that split screen, which gave Joe Biden, with his mouth hanging open and his faraway look in his eyes every time Donald Trump was speaking, and let the American people watch that for 90 minutes, was a disaster for Joe Biden. His makeup team couldn't make him look like anything other than a corpse. I mean, he was gaunt. He was just absolutely awful. I mean, you got to the point where you almost felt sorry for the man. I've watched debates. I've analyzed debates. I've prepared presidential candidates for debates. I've been involved in a few myself as a candidate for governor. And I know a little bit about debates. And this, bluntly, was the worst one I've ever seen. It far eclipsed, Admiral Stockdale going out and saying, who am I and why am I here? It far eclipsed Dan Quayle's breakdown moment with Lloyd Benson. That was a vice presidential debate, by the way. And it was nothing even close to Walter Mondale's kind of off-sided smackdown from President Reagan on the issue thing in 1984. Joe Biden was a complete and total disaster. You know, the bar was set so low. We talked about the expectation game last week. The bar was essentially on the ground, and Joe Biden still managed to trip over it. And the American people saw what the real Joe Biden is really like, unvarnished, up close, and personal. And so in my judgment, the question that now needs to be asked by everybody who is still, quote unquote, undecided is, if it was this bad on Thursday night, what would it look like if, God forbid, he was reelected in 4.5 years? It's not going to get better. It will only get worse. And so the question now becomes, are the Democrat voices that are calling for Joe Biden to be replaced going to be successful? And of course, it's going to take Joe Biden's acquiescence for that to happen. That's a giant question mark. But I'm kind of hoping it doesn't, because right now things look very, very good for Donald J. Trump and his reelection, something I've been saying all along I'm very bullish about. It just became even a little bit more bullish. And of course, this week we celebrate American independence. We're going to take probably a whole long weekend because Independence Day falls on a Thursday. So folks will have an opportunity to go to the shore, to the mountains, or just stay at home and celebrate the greatest nation in the history of the world and our independence. Of course, John Adams thought that we'd be celebrating on July 2nd, the day that the Continental Congress actually declared our independence from Great Britain. They adopted the Declaration on July 4th, and that ultimately became the day on which we celebrate. But Adams was the guy that told us to make sure we had fireworks, and I'm a great lover of fireworks, and parades, and bonfires, and all sorts of festivities to celebrate American independence. And so that is really what we should all do on July the 4th, and on July the 2nd if you want, the 3rd, the 5th, and make it a long weekend, because we really are truly blessed to live in the greatest nation in the history of the world, the United States of America. God bless America, and for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden.